Thanks very much, Amelia, and greetings to everyone from the UN Human Rights Office, or a corner of it that's temporarily located in my bedroom. I hope you all are doing well wherever you are and whatever your circumstances. I will try to be very brief and just make a few broad points. I think so many of them have already been touched on in terms of what I plan to say. And I'll just underscore, I think, some of the excellent points being made. Before I do that, I just wanted to note at the UN Human Rights Office, we've been a very active part of the overall UN response, and alongside our colleagues from UN Habitat. It's a pleasure to listen to them today, the response to the COVID-19 crisis. We've been focusing mostly on public advocacy, broad, high-level messaging coming from the UN Human Rights Office, from the UN special rapporteurs, the experts on different human rights questions, and the other parts of the UN human rights machinery. And a lot of the messaging we've been putting out really lines up with the basic principles outlined in the declaration of the Cities Coalition for Digital Rights. And it lines up with a lot of some of the efforts already ongoing that have been discussed thus far. And I can share a link in the chat to our webpage, which gives a summary of everything coming out of the UN Human Rights Office on this. But just in view of time, just two broad points that have been made, I think, very well, including by my colleague Francesca at the UN Habitat Office. Human rights are part of effective public health responses, and I think we're trying to pivot, switch the framework a bit from either an either or. You either can protect your right to privacy but give up your right to health, to the comment that was made earlier, where rights are an effective digital, human rights and effective digital public health responses go hand in hand. Linked with that, also the point that was made earlier about digital technologies as an enabler. And certainly this is, from a human rights perspective, governments, of course, have an obligation to use a maximum of their available resources to fulfill human rights, including the right to health. Technology here is a tool, is an enabler, and we very much as part of the solution. Three other interesting points that were touched on, I'll underscore. And the first one, I think, was brilliantly laid out, circling back to one of the first speakers, but the Undersecretary General of UN Habitat, who noted just the importance of digital responses that are inclusive of all. And we've put out a number of messages, press releases, other statements from the UN Human Rights Office that align perfectly with this message, that so important to make sure that marginalized and vulnerable communities have access to public health information through digital technologies. Secondly, freedom of expression, misinformation and hate speech have been touched on. Obviously, both have been amplified through social media and digital technologies, and often with devastating effect on morbidity and mortality. And a very real challenge is that of content, online content regulation and moderation. And this is becoming only, I think, more challenging and more urgent. Our messaging focuses around effective responses being based, effective responses to misinformation being based on the provision of accurate, clear, and evidence-based information, and from sources that people trust. We've noted that broad efforts to eliminate misinformation can result in censorship, which in turn will undermine trust, which in turn will reduce public participation in what needs to be a broad public response to the crisis. So we have been speaking out against initiatives that we've seen to silence critical or dissenting voices, or efforts to impose criminal sanctions on those providing inaccurate information on COVID-19, as we do think this will ultimately undermine trust.
1 minute to wrap up?
Yes.
One minute.
Okay, just to wrap up, and then I think the points on surveillance, the right to privacy, also crucial, and our basic messaging there has been around how surveillance tracing efforts need to be specifically related to public health needs, how they need to be limited in both duration, have sunset clauses, and limited in scope, and how obviously safeguards, very robust, need to be put in place around privacy, protecting private information. And just to conclude, sometimes it's challenging to explain how I think human rights and the protection of rights and digital public health and responses can go hand in hand. And I'll share in the chat box an example I saw about contact tracing using Bluetooth while protecting human rights that I think is very simple, cartoon fashion, but sums it up quite well. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these important perspectives, and we will make sure that all those reference documents and sources that you have mentioned are accessible to our community through the different channels. Thank you very much for that. Allow me now to give the floor to the representative of Dubai. I'm certain I'm going to read your name wrong, so recognize yourself by the name of Dubai. Mera Asani, International Relations and Partnerships Section Manager of Smart Dubai. The floor is yours.